Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 518th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason, joined by my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you enjoying the Olympics, Mason? This is gonna be a curveball. Have you
Honestly,
been watching any Olympic coverage?
I had this thought 2 days ago that I feel like no one's talked about the Olympics since the kind of awesome opening that happened with the music, that went all viral. And then yesterday I got like 14 different TikTok type Twitch thing links about what happened at the Olympics. So I don't know if it hasn't been going or the cool stuff hasn't been happening, but I don't really watch it. I typically watch the highlights.
Okay, so I am very different than you in that regard. I am a big Olympic watcher. Like, basically, for the month of the Olympics, I've done this now for the last two Olympics. This one, the one before, because they've been on Peacock. I will just pay $8 to NBC, and then you have all of the live US coverage and all of the replays of the world feeds.
Mm.
So you can just go and watch whatever, whenever, as long as it's happened already. So, I don't know. We had a real opportunity in table tennis. We could have had the finals be North Korea versus South Korea, which would have been really, really cool on a geopolitical level. But then the Chinese team, I believe, mollywopped the North Korean, they mollywopped the South Korean team, and then I think they also mollywopped the North Korean team, but I didn't get a chance to watch the finals yet. Anyway,
Just
yeah, it's a lot of things like that. Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of things like that where it's just you can find the sports you think are cool and watch those and just throw them on. I'd say definitely for anyone who turns to Twitch or to other background content that's somewhat chill and easy to pay attention or not pay attention to. A lot of good stuff in the Olympics. I'm a big Olympic proponent.
Heck, well, you should go. The Olympics are in the States in 4 years from now in LA, so maybe you should head out and see one of your favorite events live. That'd be kind of a cool once in a lifetime thing. Speaking of once in a lifetime, this episode we're going to be doing how to handle a rotation, and we're doing things also a little differently. We're going to try out some stuff here on CC, kind of like how Magic and other things, you're always trying to change and improve. We here at CC always talk about always improving traditionally at the beginning of the show. We're going to be moving that segment going forward for just a little bit at the end of our main topic. That way, people who are brand new to the show don't have this thing they're not really used to. And also, sometimes we feel pressured to sort of shorten our segments to make sure there's room for the training grounds in a timely way. And we think it's just going to be better for everyone. So that segment's going to be at the end of today's episode, so get excited for that. But we do want to quickly give a shout out to our patrons who have started supporting the show. Bobby and Lane, thank you so much for your support on it. And a big shout out to our sponsors, Untap.gg. You can check the show notes for the link. Untap.gg is a overlay that allows you to track sort of what's going on in programs like MTG Arena. And they have helpful things from kind of this is a really drafted card and a high win rate when playing or when drawn. And also can do deck tracking, which is a thing I know Spencer's a big fan of, that shows you sort of what is in your deck, kind of like if you had a piece of paper in front of you and you were marking things off as you drew it in real time and kind of be like, oh yeah, I do have this out I can draw to. If that sounds like something that might be good for you, check out the description for a free download version. There is a premium one. You don't have to use that to get the things we talked about. Everything we talked about is in the free side. And you can also check constructedcriticism.com for the swag store. If you want to do that, we added some new things there. But, Abe, it is time for our main topic today. And this one is actually sparked from a Patreon question we had about 2 or 3 weeks ago and thought it was a really good question on sort of something that doesn't get talked about a lot and can be really helpful. And that is today's main trading grounds on kind of how to handle rotation. I'm going to quickly read Adrian's question so we're all on the same page as we jump into this. So, it's rotation time. I'm creating a Google Doc of good cards that are surviving rotation. Can you please point me to the episode that talks about this? It's right here, Adrian. We're doing it right now. And briefly discuss your process for going into a new standard. And we didn't really have one. And nor did I really have anything that we could point Adrian to. And I believe you actually just pointed out this should be the episode. So that's what we're covering today. But Abe, before we get into that, in case someone's maybe newer to Magic and they haven't experienced a rotation before, what is rotation?
Yeah, so rotation means that as the new year of sets are coming out, so in this case, with Bloomborough coming out, standard, so we lose the sets that are 3 years old. They all become no longer legal in the format, hence rotating out. And then the new standard format exists of the sets that are still legal, that are within those last 2 years, and then this year of releases. So that means that Bloomborough and then the following sets this year will all build towards the full standard format. And then come next year, there'll be a release that then pushes out those sets, and so that's what's called rotation. As certain cards become no longer legal, and then we start adding to the card pool again with new legal cards.
Yeah, and this is sometimes a really sort of scary or off-putting moment for some people in the past. That's why recently, in actually the last year, it got moved to 3 years for rotation instead of two. So now your cards and decks last a little longer. And as a community, we're really going into kind of a new territory when it comes to this rotation, right? Which is what I sort of love about this episode is there's a lot of laying the ground for some new things and sort of where we are. And maybe this will change how we kind of do things going forward. But traditionally, this has been the way that sort of like Abe and myself have gone about these things. So, with that in mind, one of the first things that you really kind of want to think about is sort of level zero. Another way to look at this is like pillars of the format in the past. Kind of what looks to be the baseline strongest thing now walking into this new format. So, I think a good example of like a level zero thing when it comes to the blue white cards is No More Lies, right? Cards that support that kind of controlling or tempo strategy are very strong. White Virtue is another example of this, where you want to be able to kind of build around or play that card in your flashy tempo creature decks.
Right, or even just determining what are the strongest things I can do out the gate. I mean, you see this a lot, not even just around rotation, but anytime there's a new set release. Is it that Boros Convoke is, very clearly the strongest thing you can do, the fastest aggro deck with, the most powerful synergies? Or is it that, maybe the blue control deck didn't lose anything from rotation, right? No cards from it left. That could be the case, and so therefore it's the incumbent kind of like best thing to do. Really, this often is just what are the best cards you can play, what are the strongest things to be doing, like you said, Mason, and it kind of starts to dictate how you build a format, right? I mean, if you think about it from really the start, back when there were a lot more events in paper, this iterative process would really start with, okay, what's the best thing I can do just with all the cards available to me, thinking that no one's necessarily going to be able to plan for what's actually going to happen. And then over time, right, people iterate. They develop new strategies. So the goal in looking at level zero is to understand what those things are so that you can make sure to do the powerful things with things you're looking at, but also, start to build that framework for planning ahead to what else is going to be good because these cards are good, right? If Shieldred's really good, what are the cards that are going to be needed to play to beat Shieldred? Or if Convoke's going to be really good, what are the cards that are going to be good because Convoke is strong?
Yeah, really highlighting like the answers, right? And I think that is a big part of just any Magic format, right? Like sometimes you hear people say, why isn't this good in Pioneer? Or why isn't this good in Modern? And often the answer is like weak to Thoughtseize or Fatal Push, or in the case of Modern, weak to Galvanic Discharge or Leyline Binding, right? The answers that are commonly played really dictate the threats. And also, you'll often see something weird in Standard when it comes to a threat played, and that's because it dodges the removal, right? We saw Razorlash Transmogrant about 2 years ago be a premium sort of card that people played, not because it was like the best in class 2-drop or whatever, but because it dodged some amount of the removal with Go for the Throat and played well with cards like Rafine. And so it was like, yeah, this card's like reasonable-ish, but it's actually great for this period of time because of these other external factors that were going on. And that is really what Standard is, and what all formats are, is they're an ecosystem, right? So we're talking about this level zero, and we're really kind of citing kind of things you've already seen in these answers, and those are good things. But as you're like kind of moving forward a little bit, it's important to remember that like the environment is going to be different. Now that things like, we lost the Innistrad sets, which means, Memory Deluge is gone. We lost like Graveyard Trespasser, some of these cool cards. The Kamigawa set is gone that had so many powerful cards. The Wandering Emperor, in and of itself, leaving a format, fundamentally changes the way you play against white decks. And changes kind of the cards you can and can't play, And that's not even counting the channel lands and everything else that left with SNC and the triomes, etc. So there's a big rotation that's happened. You've lost a lot of things. And it's important to remember that just because something was good before or was, a solid-ish strategy or an up-and-coming strategy, the predator may have left, but it's a whole new ecosystem, right? If the lion rules the safari desert and then it disappears, well, suddenly, maybe Abe Steins move in and they start hunting the gazelle, right? And everyone thought the gazelle was going to take over, but there are implications that are really, really hard to see.
Yeah, and I think that, what you're saying about looking at the format as an ecosystem, it goes further than just, what are the decks that I know about because they're, the things that were played right before rotation. I think looking at the format from the ecosystem, right, it has to do with what those pillars of the format are. We talk about rules of engagement on the show. We've been talking about a lot recently. And we've got a few episodes in, in the last, like 5 or 10 that I think really speak to some of what I'm going to talk about here. But defining those rules of engagement for what the standard format's going to look like, that comes from understanding the ecosystem that we're now going to be living in, right? What are the things that moved away? What are the power vacuums in the standard format that really exist now because of that? What are the cards that, are staying, that are going to have more opportunity to see more play? That maybe, were close to having their opportunity, but weren't quite there because they were crowded out by other options. Looking at a format that now doesn't have a deck like Teamer Analyst, you might say that, a deck like, Bant Toxic, or even just those toxic cards, right? It didn't lose a lot. You still have Skrelv's Hive, you still have Venerated Rot Priest, you still have the Seed Core. You have all these things that make it possible to play this previously powerful archetype, but with some of those decks like Analyst gone, decks like, Domain leaving the format, those were some of the best matchups for that deck because they were slow to develop and they weren't able to play all the right answers. And now decks might be more able to do that as they're trying to constrain to, the fact they have to play maybe a 2-color mana base. That's a lot easier for them to manage to cast all their spells. And they're more able to focus on the lower to ground decks rather than having to engage in Atraxa or going over the top of each other. So it's important to think about things not only at a level of what was good and what was powerful, because, I would be shocked if in this current rotation, the Toxic deck is not one of many decks that are really playable, that are kind of based out of the block synergies given to us, because it is a powerful deck. It has a lot of powerful cards in it. But looking at what's going to be positioned well and what has the most opportunity to thrive, there were times in Pioneer, Mason, that I know we talked about at length, even just 2 or 3 years ago, where it was like, you can't really play an allied colored deck because we don't have allied colored fast lands. Until Phyrexia All-Be-One came out, we didn't have the allied fast lands in the Pioneer format. So it was just not possible to play like a green-white deck with good mana. Angels constantly suffered from this. It's important to keep in mind those things that really start to dictate what are the options that are viable. What are the combinations of the good cards when you look over what is legal? What are the new cards entering the format? What are the ones that are, mainstays sitting around and staying in the picture? What of those can go together? And what's the limits of what you can do?
Exactly, yeah. And sort of embracing all of that and looking at it is important. And I do want to quickly touch on, before we move on to the next part of this all, is that idea of like the toxic type decks. Wizards recently has been really pushing like this idea of having a deck every year or so that's kind of like contained to a set or two, and sort of like, hey, this isn't going to get much, but here's like a whole deck for you, right? And I think Toxic is the marquee example of that. And we're seeing it somewhat in standard now with Bloomberg, where there seems to be a lot of support for monocolored decks, right? Where it seems like they're trying to like lay the seeds for a couple different things. So looking the direction they're telling you to play is a great early on thing too, of just like, we talked about level 0. It's like, listen, I don't know what's going on, right? There's a lot of different things that could be going. I'm just going to play Skrelv's Hive, and all those friends, and just sort of kill you really quickly, And if your game plan is to like kill my creatures, well, I hope you have enough of it, because I'm just going to overwhelm you ideally, right? When things like Convoke are not easily part of the metagame because they lost such an enabler and Voldaren Epicure, and they have to explore new variations of it, You can get away with doing stuff like that and then switch away as the metagame develops, right? You don't have to stick with one thing forever, in theory. But now we talked a bit about this. I think one of the really interesting things, Abe, is we've talked granularly about a lot of these topics, but when it comes to testing with these sort of things, how do you go about actually getting in the streets and working through these ideas and these things that we have?
I mean, I would say if you're someone who has access to it, the best thing you can do is, especially in this time where, it's kind of transitioning everywhere in Magic, right? There's, a new set either just came out or is about to come out, right? There's new ideas to try, is to just build some decks, some frameworks of ideas, or find some decks online that you see other people talking about or playing with. If you find them on Twitter, you can find them on, I'm sure the Spike subreddit has some people talking about it. I know people have been talking in our Discord about decks. I know Yeoman5, a supporter of the show, he does like a big deck list dump. I know, Mason, in the past you've been writing I don't know if you still are, but you still write articles about new decks to play. I know you just did a shuffle up and play video about the standard format that I'm sure has, great ideas for places to start. Right? There's all this information resources. Just, proxy them up and play. See what feels good. Don't just play because you want to know what the best of these decks are, because honestly, 9 out of 10 of them won't be there in 6 months, right? Things are going to change enough and the format's going to work itself out enough that the things that are actually really strong will the cream will rise to the top, But what's going to define what that cream is and how you're going to catch on before that is really getting time to play with the cards, see them interact, see what felt good, see what wins games, see what's hard to answer, see what's maybe not as tough as it seemed like it would be, and just start taking notes on, what are the things that are impressing you? What are the things that aren't impressing you that maybe you thought would? Something that when this wasn't a rotation, but something that at the time where they made the large bans to left cards in standard for a longer period of time was like, okay, is Shieldred really that good right now in this iteration of the format where everyone's paying attention to Shieldred? And a lot of people found that they were like, I don't really want to keep playing this card as the number of copies I'm playing because it's too susceptible, it's too targeted, right? And if all the ideas you're seeing are successfully targeting that, you can know that before you even have to play your first standard tournament or before that first, arena qualifier or local, event, or, if it's standard RCQ season, whenever it may be, you don't have to worry about, oh, is this the right thing to do? You start having an idea of what are the good things and what are the powerful things, and really just playing to get a feel for what things will look like, right? It's having that exploratory period of the standard format, but just spending more time in it than maybe a lot of people get to when they're have to wait for the set to come out and then are, kind of trying to focus on finding that right deck for their challenge or their local.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think like another thing to look at too is kind of like trying to test the extreme sometimes, right? One of the things you mentioned, the shuffle up and play video. So we had access to Bloomborough a little early in order to do that. Reed Duke and Jim Davis and I. And one of the things that like Reed did was he really tried exploring this newish version of Green Black that leaned on having more mana, right? Playing Blossoming Turtle and cards of that nature, like Lumbra, the new bear, that really maximize having all of this mana and trying to go kind of bigger than what we had seen Green Black successfully do in the past. And, some of like the stuff going on there was like, well, Domain is gone now, right? So he's allowed to go bigger and he's allowed to test in that spot because before it was like, oh, you're trying to go a little longer, you're going to get a Traxxas. Like, what are you doing? You need to go underneath everybody. And so his deck had a little bit more chunk to it in order to try and do that thing. And I think that sort of approach is really good, right? Where it's like, okay, what, like before, what was like a powerful looking thing that contextually stopped me? Let me try experimenting in that area, right? Like, are there new things stopping me? Was it actually just not good enough? What's going on? Let me go there. And then I think rapid iteration is the other thing I would say about this testing, which is just like, you can try something and, if it doesn't feel right or it's not working, you can throw it away and maybe come back a couple weeks later, right? Sometimes you're just too far ahead of the curve or everyone's just not playing those kind of decks right now, right? Maybe you have a deck that's great against, Gix and Deep Cavern Bat, which you identify as two cards you think are going to be really strong in standard. Well, if no one's playing those cards, then your deck that lines up well against those might not be good, but as maybe players do agree with that as an initial assessment and come back to it, then you can go back to that. And testing, in my mind, really at its core, Abe, is just trying to get a feel for how things line up and how they interact so that you can make informed decisions when game day comes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the number one thing about testing that is most important to do, right? It's to make sure that when you're playing the actual tournament, you're more prepared than you were before you tested. And, be it if you're trying out different angles of attack, different configurations of the same archetype, or if it's just that you're trying archetypes to see what sticks, no matter what, you should really be playing, especially in the early days, because you're not gonna have the best deck in the first week. It's very unlikely that you're gonna know already that now I should just be tuning and tuning and tuning. It's like, no, you're gonna be playing against a wide variety of things and making sure you have a deck that you feel comfortable with and is playing by the right rules of engagement for the format and just doing the right kind of stuff to exploit what other people will try to do in that first week or that first month. Right? That's what Standard's all about. And the more you can do to prepare yourself to be ready to do that, the better.
With that all being said, as you're kind of going through this, I think kind of the last thing to really look at is how to process early results, right? And you just kind of hit on that, Abe, where it's like no one's really going to know sort of what's best, and you're going to see things sometimes where, like, traditionally a very common thing is aggressive decks that are kind of tuned or have strong packages, you see them succeed early because they kind of know what they're doing. And if you stumble against a deck like that, you're going to lose. You've played against Slickshot Show Off with your tuned decks, and you sometimes, have a bad draw and doesn't come together. What's going to happen when maybe you're playing, one too many 3-drops or something like that, right? It's just not going to work. And so how do you parse those early results?
Especially when it's like standard RSQ season, one of the things I'll do is I'll make sure to, especially in like the very first couple weeks, look at those challenge results and those league 5-0s and everything gets posted every day. Just find the information that's out there from the sources that do get published and look at how people are changing archetypes over time, right? This is going to be a time where, like, in any format at any time, this is going to be where there's the most difference between decks from deck builders who are really trying, right? People are going to be trying to iterate, trying to make their deck better, trying to find ways to solve the problems they're encountering, trying out different cards, trying out different sideboard plans, trying out different approaches to the problems they're encountering. And if you're really trying to be the best standard player you can be for that format and trying to be as prepared as possible for that format, you would be doing yourself a disservice by not taking the time to really research what other people are doing and trying to understand what their thought process is. Is it that people are moving away from, certain kill conditions or certain removal spells or certain counter spells or, whatever it is, certain threats, because they feel like they're not effective and trying to find other ways to solve those problems? Are people, kind of combining ideas between two different decks in similar lanes? It could be that Knight Errant of Eos is, just like a card that could be good in versions of Toxic, because it's able to leverage making all those might tokens and having all those cheap creatures that then you can find a little bit more gas, right? Or you have, right, you want to do the stuff with Rot Priest as kind of your reach, your over the finish line kind of plays, and you need to find that Rot Priest, right? Someone could be trying to do that, or they could be combining two different thoughts about mid-range decks, or finding that certain cards are performing well for one archetype and mixing it into the other. You can be a part of that too, but it really comes from looking not at just the results from an archetype standpoint, not being like, oh, well, this happened like last year. Oh, well, Domain won everything, right? Domain is unstoppable. It's like, well, is Domain that good? Is it something that, needs to be, right, is just the end-all be-all? Probably not. There's probably a lot of individual card choices that are going on there, and understanding those and understanding how the decks can interweave, that's a huge, huge part of my process. And especially paying attention to the things that look off the wall, right? The more out of bounds of what you're thinking about an idea is that succeeds, the more you should take note of it and pay attention to why it succeeded, because it will, like 9 times out of 10, teach you something about the format that you didn't know. And that I always find to be really important. Like in the times in the SCG tour where standard was a part of the classics, it was a part of the opens, and it was a format that really needed to be kept up with. I even wrote an article entirely about tier 2 decks that had a chance to improve, right, with rotation. Tier 2 decks that had a chance to improve with a new set release, right? Things that I could know and like kind of bookmark in my head of like, oh, I remember someone did this. How are they doing that, and why did that work? And what can I learn and apply that to a new iteration of that same concept? And those things are all over the Moto deck lists you'll find. They're all over the paper deck lists you'll find, if you really take the time to understand how it is people are building their decks. And there's just so much information being, put out in the first, especially in like the first 2 weeks, where people are just constantly trying new things.
Yep, I love that. And I love sort of that thing you said at the end there too about kind of having an open heart to like, this is what has a chance to improve, right? Like, yeah, maybe this deck wasn't the greatest before, but that doesn't mean it can't improve and get better. So I think you nailed it there. And Abe, any final words that you have on this topic?
I think that when it comes to standard and handling a rotation, I think people think about it as a lot of like, oh, like now's, and a lot of people, right, it is their entry point into standard, or it's, they're worried because they're feeling a loss of what they knew in standard. But I think that players who really engage with a format, be it standard, be it pioneer, be it modern, they know when there's a change to their format, or if there's new cards entering their format. They always have a bit of a better jumping off point than those who don't. And so if you're someone who loves standard and you've been playing standard, even if it's just been playing your Esper or Fiend deck that now is rotating out, you'll be surprised with yourself with how much muscle memory and how much just overall intuition you might have from seeing a lot of these cards play with each other. And then it's really going to be a lot about learning what the new things do to that. And, anyone can do that. If you make a point of playing a little bit of standard here and there, once a month, you'll find yourself much more prepared than you think you would.
That's going to do it for our main topic this week. Thank you once again, Adrian, for giving us this topic, and hopefully you all found this helpful. There are lots of resources out there that you can go to once standards are really gotten going, but early on it can be super hard, and I hope this was helpful to at least give you some foundation on where to go. You can also go over to patreon.com/ccmtg if you want to support the show, and we have a Discord there with other like-minded people that are talking about things like this. We even had one member, I don't know if you noticed this, Abe, about a month before standard rotation was so excited for standard. He actually wrote out a big thing on kind of like what cards he thought were really interesting and good. I wonder if Adrian was sparked by that conversation. But you can check that out where you can find like-minded people. And normally this would be the part of the show where we talk about their question, but that was sort of the whole main topic today, so that's what we did instead. But it's time for Always Improving, as it is the main point of the show. It is something that we are always trying to do and get better at. And Abe, my Always Improving moment this week really came from a different game. And so I'm going to have to give a little context. So I've been playing a good bit of Marvel Snap, which is a game I really enjoy and I think can teach people a lot about stuff in Magic, from sort of planning ahead to sequencing and things of that nature. But they had this new game mode that was called Deadpool's Diner, which we don't need to get into all the details, but basically it was a mode where if you did kind of well in it, you could unlock a card for free, which was great. And it was a very interesting card, one that I really liked. It seemed kind of strong. And so I wanted to acquire the card. And I kind of just took a little bit of time to think about what makes the most sense to go about, playing in this game mode to get the thing. Because it's a mode where you kind of have to bet, like, essentially chips, like poker. And I sort of decided that for myself and sort of what I wanted to engage with it is, I didn't want to sit there and grind for hours and hours and hours, right? That wasn't in for me. The event is running and still going for 2 weeks. And so I was like, honestly, anytime I feel I'm kind of favored, I'm just going to shove all my chips. Because in this mode, you actually get chips back, and you just have to eventually win so many. And after kind of taking a second to sit down there, talk to myself, do it, I ended up getting it done in like 4 days. So it's running a little bit hot, but also just kind of engaging the way I wanted to, of shoving all the time and going up and up the ladder. And the always improving moment really comes from sitting down and being like, what do I want from this game mode, right? And like, what do I want from this? And I think this is something that's we talk about sometimes in Magic too, where it's like, what am I supposed to be getting from this? And being honest and truthful with yourself. And it's okay if that differs than maybe what other people want to do, or what people are telling you. Just being kind of true to yourself and doing that, I think, is so important. It's something we sometimes lose sight of. And so I had that always improving moment this week.
That's a really, really great one of, just the same kind of follow through we talk about in terms of goals and Magic and life a lot here on the show, and especially in the segment. But, right, take a step back, examine what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then building a strategy around how you're going to do that and how you're going to approach that, down to like your deck choice in the game and your play strategy. Like, that is applying all that same mindset, and that's really awesome. My always improvement this week is kind of it's going to feel like a bit of a backwards one to some of you, but this weekend was an SCG Con in Baltimore. That's about 20 minutes from my house. Like, Baltimore's always been the hometown event for me. It's always been a great one to attend. I'm always really excited for it. But this time around, it was a modern event. It had like their trials on Friday, the modern was on Saturday, and then on Sunday there was the legacy event. And I was just looking over the events, and rather than doing what definitely many past versions of me would have done, which is kind of like find a way to bend over backwards to make it happen, I could have tried to trade off the Saturday with someone else to make sure I could make it to the event and play some modern, and then like scrounge together a legacy deck real quick and play some leagues on Moto and really throw myself into it that way. I realized that would just not have been fun for me, and that event didn't have to be for me in that way. And I really let myself just think about what were the things that I wanted to do that were going to be fun at that event, right? Like, outside of playing the 7 or 8 round 5Ks or 10Ks or even 2Ks, what is it that I want to do with my weekend, and how is it that I want to engage with Magic right now? And came with the answer that, I was really, really happy to be just going to the event when I was not working, after, working my regular day on Saturday, and then spending some time with my partner, and just scheduling a day of like, yeah, let me get some friends together who I haven't seen, or, run into some, like Misplaced Ginger was there. He won the event, the modern portion of it, which was really exciting. Got to see him for a bit on Sunday. But just like, organize some team drafts, get to play some cool Magic that I don't normally get to play otherwise, and just hang out and enjoy Magic in the way that I wanted to this weekend, and not feel like a pressure to, be the super sicko, competitive spiky player that I once was. And that's been kind of a big change for me in general, to kind of feel that. But it definitely made me feel better about the last like week and a half, 2 weeks of leading up to the event, and also just made me have a better weekend than I think I would have playing. Like, I could have scrounged together an Adu deck, and I could have, read a bunch of stuff on, how to play it, and played some leagues online, and, really done my cramming before the event, and gone and probably done pretty well. But having that realization that wouldn't be the best way for me to spend my time, and I'd rather kind of hold my chips for another weekend where I might enjoy things more, was just it was a big upside for me.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and it's sort of like when I talk about Deadpool's diner a bit there, right? Where it's just like, how do you actually want to do things, and like what makes sense for you? And also, it will still be there, right? Like, if I didn't get the card, it wasn't in the world. You not playing the tournament wasn't in the world. You did let Ginger win, which unfortunately will be his personality for the next year, but that's okay. You let him have his moment.
I want him to keep paying his bills, and if he doesn't win tournaments, I fear for what happens to his Twitch channel, so it's good. Anytime he gets a win, it's good. I dare him to come to my neck of the woods for a limited event and see how it fares. I know there's been a lot of discourse about sealed online. I don't care. It can be a straight up draft event. I'm calling you out, Misplaced Ginger. I will rinse you personally in the streets of Baltimore in limited, any day, any way. Okay, you can take that to the bank.
It sounds like we need to get one of those like 500 card duplicate sealed pools and have y'all battle. That's what it sounds like. We need like an exhibition
Set it up.
match. So that sounds
Set it up.
Sounds sick to me. CubeCon, make it happen.
Let me know the stakes. Set it up.
$500 each. Cash.
I'm there. And he can't bring Canadian cash. That stuff's not worth as much.
Yeah, well, he has to bring the equivalent amount. You know, gotta get
15,000 Canadian against my 500 US. We're right there.
He works at a bank. He knows this stuff. Well, that's gonna do it for this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to find us, once again, go to patreon.com/GCMTG. The show will always be free, but you can go there if you want to support. Go to Twitter at CCMTG. You can find the show there. From there, you can also find myself at Mason E. Clark on Twitter. You can reach out for coaching there or via my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. You can check me out at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can also check me out on TCG Player, writing articles for them there. And at this point in time, you'll have to check it out on YouTube. But I'm going to be on the MTGO Masters this week. I am playing no banned list modern, Abe, which is very an interesting format. And normally I think it'd be kind of boring, right? It'd be Dark Depths and Hogak, the mirror match, but we're doing a Conquest tournament, Abe. So we have to bring 3 decks, bring a ban. And because of that, I'm doing some radical stuff. I got no Hogak, no Dark Depths. So it's going to be a bit of, I'm putting a lot of, chips in the basket that my ideas are crazy but well thought out. So we'll have to see how that goes. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
You can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. You can DM me there to inquire about coaching, or you can send me email over at morenothings@gmail.com. Yeah, or you can find me on the show each and every week that you're already listening to. Come back next week for more.
We'll see y'all next week for another episode of CCMTG.